Hi, I'm the man they erased, slowly and politely. A year after my divorce, my ex-wife texted me, "We need to talk, urgently." I told her, "Another time. I'm on a date with your sister." The next day, I found out just how deep the betrayal went. They didn't just break a marriage, they rewrote the story, turned me into the villain in my own life, sold my house, split my family, used my silence like a weapon against me. And all I did was try to keep the peace. But what do you do when the ones you trusted most smile while stealing everything beneath your feet? This isn't about revenge. This is about truth. And what happens when you finally speak it? But be careful, because once you do, they don't just push back. They make sure you never speak again. I had worked hard to make my life quiet again. Not the empty kind of quiet that comes after loss, but the kind you earn after rebuilding, piece by piece, decision by decision. The house was smaller than the one my ex-wife and I once shared, but it fit me better. One floor, fewer rooms, nothing echoing when I walked from the kitchen to the living room. That evening felt ordinary in the best way. The sun was already slipping low behind the trees lining the street, casting long shadows across the driveway. I had just locked the front door and headed toward my car, the smell of dinner still lingering on my jacket. I was meeting Nicole for a simple meal. Nothing fancy, just a place we liked where the lights were soft and nobody rushed you out the door. As I drove, I caught myself noticing how steady everything felt. No rushing thoughts, no rehearsed arguments playing in my head. No need to explain myself to anyone. For the first time in years, my evenings belonged to me. Being the youngest son in my family had taught me early how to exist without demanding space. When things got tense, I learned to stay out of the way. When voices got louder, I learned to listen instead of speak. That instinct had followed me into adulthood, into marriage, into work, into the years when keeping the peace felt more important than being heard. But I wasn't living that way anymore. I parked near the restaurant and sat for a moment with the engine off, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. The radio hummed quietly. Some talk show I wasn't really listening to. I felt grounded, balanced, like someone who had finally learned how to breathe without waiting for permission. That's when my phone vibrated. I didn't reach for it right away. There was no urgency in my body, no spike of adrenaline, just a mild irritation, the way you feel when something intrudes on a moment you were enjoying. When I glanced down, her name was on the screen, Madison. It had been a year since the divorce papers were signed, 12 months of deliberate distance, no calls, no check-ins, no just wondering how you are messages disguised as courtesy. We had agreed, explicitly, that silence was the healthiest option. Seeing her name again felt like running into an old scar you'd forgotten was there. Not painful, just unexpected. I unlocked the phone. "We need to talk, urgently." I read it once, then again. The word urgent used to rule my life. It used to mean dropped plans, sleepless nights, and conversations that somehow always ended with me apologizing for things I hadn't done. Urgent had been her favorite lever, a way to pull me back into orbit whenever she felt things slipping beyond her control. I stared at the screen longer than I'd ever admit out loud, not because I missed her, not because I felt tempted, but because my body remembered something my mind had already let go of. That old reflex, to respond, to fix, to engage before thinking. I locked the phone and set it face down on the passenger seat. For a moment, I considered ignoring it completely, pretending I hadn't seen it, letting the silence do the work for me. But I knew better. Silence, when left unexplained, has a way of growing teeth. I picked the phone back up, opened the message, and began typing. I didn't ask what was wrong. I didn't ask why now. I didn't ask anything at all. Another time. I'm on a date with your sister. The words appeared calm, almost polite. I didn't reread them, didn't soften them, didn't add an emoji or a qualifier. I hit send and slipped the phone into my jacket pocket. No shaking hands, no racing heart, just a choice made cleanly. Inside the restaurant, Nicole was already seated near the window. She smiled when she saw me, that easy smile that never came with expectations attached. We talked about small things, her day, a story from work, a movie we both half wanted to see. I listened. I laughed when it made sense. I stayed present. But something had shifted, not outwardly, nothing dramatic, no alarms going off. Just a subtle awareness, like the pressure change before a storm you can't yet see. The phone stayed quiet through dinner, no follow-up, no reaction, no anger spilling through the screen. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made me uneasy. After we paid and walked out into the cooling air, I noticed how alert I felt. Not anxious, just aware. The way you feel when you know something has been set in motion, even if you don't yet know its shape. Back home later that night, I set my keys on the counter and poured a glass of water. The house was still, comfortable, exactly the life I'd worked to build. I checked my phone once more before setting it on the nightstand. Nothing. Lying in bed, staring up at the ceiling, I thought about how silence had always worked in my family, how the quiet moments were never the end of anything, just the space before consequences arrived. Being the youngest had taught me that much. I didn't know then that ignoring that message wouldn't end the conversation. It would start something far worse. The next morning came like any other. I got up early, not because I had to, but because my body's been trained by decades of routine. Coffee, shower, dress, open the curtains just enough to let in light, not heat. I didn't even check my phone at first. I wasn't waiting for anything. But by the time I'd buttoned my shirt and was tying my shoes, it started to ring. Not a text. A call. The name on the screen made me pause. Calvin. My cousin on my mother's side. We weren't close, never had been, but we saw each other at every holiday gathering. He was the type who always had something going on, always asked too many questions without answering any of his own. I answered with a flat, "Hey. Hey, man, He sounded like he was calling from outside, wind rustling in the background. You good? I'm fine. Why? A weird pause. He cleared his throat. No reason. I just figured, after everything, you might be, I don't know, processing. I straightened up. Processing what? Another pause, longer this time. Then he said, I thought you'd heard. The hairs on the back of my neck twitched. Heard what? Again, no direct answer. He said, It's already being talked about. Pretty much all over. What's being talked about? My tone sharpened before I could stop it. You know, he fumbled. I didn't want to be the one to bring it up if you were already dealing with it. But people are saying that you blew up at Madison last night. Said something out of pocket. I sent one message, I said slowly, carefully. That's all. Calvin let out a breath. Then I guess someone added color to it. Because the version floating around now, it's a whole thing. You told her off in front of people. Humiliated her. Said something about her sister, and now people are saying you've been seeing Jessica all this time. Jessica, her sister, my dinner companion. I rubbed my forehead and walked into the kitchen, grounding myself on the cool tile. Where are people hearing this? Group chat, a few Facebook posts. My mom even called me about it this morning. His mom, my aunt, which meant my mother knew too, and probably my brothers, and probably Madison's church group, her coworkers, her nail technician, everyone but me. I laughed, but it didn't sound like a laugh. Is she the one saying this? I mean, he hesitated. She didn't post anything directly, but you know how it works. A few people talked to her last night, and look, man, I didn't call to make it worse. I thought you were already in the loop. That was the moment it hit me. I'd never been in the loop. Not during the marriage, not during the divorce, and definitely not now. I wasn't even on the bench. I was in the parking lot, trying to figure out which game was being played. All right, I said, keeping my voice steady. Thanks for the call. You sure you're... I'm good, Calvin. I ended the call and stood there in the kitchen, phone still in my hand, surrounded by the silence I'd worked so hard to build. It wasn't just the lie. It was the fact that it had already been accepted as truth. Somebody else had told the story first, bent it, framed it, polished it just enough to make me look like the villain and her the wounded party. And the worst part? I hadn't even opened my mouth. I sat down at the table and stared at nothing for a while. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't bother warming it. No messages from Madison, no follow-up from Jessica. Just me, a kitchen that smelled faintly of dish soap, and a head full of noise I hadn't asked for. I had thought not replying in anger was the right move. Grown up, measured, dignified even. But silence, again, had left a vacuum. And she'd filled it before I had the chance to speak. People weren't just talking. They were deciding. And nobody had asked me a damn thing. By noon, it was clear the conversation I avoided had already happened, just without me in the room. That's when I started replaying everything I'd ignored for years. I didn't mean to spiral, not really. But when you're the kind of person who spent most of your life avoiding conflict, even a moment of stillness can pull memories out of places you thought were locked up for good. The rest of that afternoon blurred. I had work to do, emails, a few invoices to approve, a call I was supposed to return, but I couldn't get traction. I walked around the house more than I sat still, picking things up just to put them back down. I opened the fridge 3 times without taking anything out. A coffee receipt from last week peeked out from under my keys. Madison's name was still listed on the rewards account. The name alone didn't bother me. It was the tiny proof of how long I'd let things carry forward without bothering to update them, like pieces of a life I no longer had, still showing up with my name on them. I sat at the kitchen table again. There was a voicemail from my mom I hadn't played yet. I let it sit. I wasn't in the mood to hear anything padded with concern and edged with judgment. On the wall above the table hung a photo from my niece's birthday, one of those big family shots where everyone's smiling, arms looped around each other like we're all on good terms. In that picture, I was standing just behind Madison, slightly turned, not quite centered. You wouldn't notice me unless you were looking for me. That was the story of my life, wasn't it? Even as a kid, I was the one people forgot was in the room. I was quiet, sure, but not because I had nothing to say. It was because saying it never changed anything. My older brothers had louder voices, stronger opinions, quicker tempers. My parents used to call me the easy one. Said it like it was a compliment. You were always so easygoing, honey. What they meant was I didn't make waves. And when you don't make waves, Nobody asks if you're drowning. I remembered a dozen moments in childhood where decisions were made on my behalf, and no one thought to check if I agreed. Family plans, birthday gifts, even what school I'd attend. Those choices were always announced, not discussed. And the few times I pushed back, I got told I was being dramatic, difficult, ungrateful. So I learned to nod, smile, adapt. That habit followed me like a shadow. In my marriage, it was the same song, different lyrics. Madison figured out early that she didn't need to raise her voice to get her way. Just needed to say something was urgent or imply that I was being insensitive if I hesitated. If she cried, the conversation ended. If she said, "You never listen," I folded before the sentence was done. And for a long time, I told myself that was just being a good partner, being patient, compromising. But that's not what it was. I wasn't compromising. I was surrendering in small doses, again and again, until my sense of self had eroded into silence. It's a strange thing to admit, even to yourself, that the divorce didn't hurt because it ended something. It hurt because it forced me to look at how long I'd let something false continue. She hadn't broken me. She just held the mirror, and I hated what I saw. I sat on the edge of my bed later that afternoon, pulling at the collar of my shirt, feeling like I didn't quite fit inside my own skin. Sunlight poured through the blinds, warming the carpet, but the air around me felt cold. I thought about that text, the one from the night before. "We need to talk, urgently." How many times had I reacted to that exact line over the years? Dozens, more. And how many times had I assumed the right move was to show up, listen, keep the peace? Last night, I didn't. For the first time, I paused. And even though the backlash came fast, even though the narrative had already been twisted by the time I woke up this morning, I wasn't sorry for the decision. For once, I hadn't played the part she expected. I hadn't stepped into the frame she built. And I could feel something shifting inside me. Not rage, not bitterness, just clarity, cool, quiet, and sharp. I wasn't confused anymore. I was taking inventory. I was noticing who had spoken, who hadn't, who rushed to interpret my silence, and who benefited from it. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had an intention. No more being predictable. No more letting people speak for me just because I hesitated to interrupt. From now on, my voice would be mine, not louder, just clearer. And the part that scared me most wasn't what she'd said or who had heard it. It was realizing how long I'd trained everyone around me to do exactly what they were doing now, talking over me, around me, without ever asking me to speak. What scared me wasn't what she'd said. It was how long I'd trained people to speak for me. The realization didn't leave me angry. It left me quiet. And that quiet made room for a kind of awareness I hadn't had before. Not the kind that leads to confrontation, but the kind that watches, takes notes, waits. A few days passed in that quiet. Then came the text. Group message. From my older brother's wife, Michelle. "Hey, we're all getting together Sunday afternoon. Just something casual. Hope you can swing by." I read it twice. It was worded like a picnic invite. But the timing, just a week after the message from Madison, didn't sit right. Michelle never texted me about family get-togethers unless someone was sick, pregnant, or about to make a scene. And this one came with no time. No location, no emojis, just a placeholder for something she expected I'd decode. I replied, "Sure, just let me know where." The address came through 5 minutes later, my parents' house. Of course, Sunday arrived slow, the kind of gray Midwest day where everything feels just a bit heavier. I took my time driving over, turned off the radio, Let my thoughts fill the space. The house looked exactly the same. Same driveway, same flag hanging from the porch, same wind chimes rattling just above the doorbell. But something felt arranged. As if even the house knew this wasn't a casual catch-up. When I stepped inside, I was hit with the smell of brewed coffee and old furniture polish. The kind of combination only found in homes where people clean when company's coming, but only when they expect things to get messy. My mother greeted me with a soft smile and a plate of cookies. We thought we'd all just talk a bit. Sit down, sweetheart. That tone. That gather around. We're doing this as a family tone. I looked around. Michelle and my brother Dean sat side by side on the couch. Madison sat in the armchair near the window, legs crossed, hands folded, face calm like she hadn't sent the spark that lit this fire. And my mother stood by the kitchen counter, arms crossed, not in anger, but in expectation. No one sat at the head of the table. That was left open, intentionally, like they were offering me a seat at my own judgment. I didn't take it. I chose the chair off to the side. Michelle asked how work was going. Dean offered me coffee. The performance had begun. No one brought up the message right away. They circled it like a slow dance, each step rehearsed. Madison didn't speak. She didn't need to. Michelle cleared her throat first. We just wanted to talk, make sure everyone's okay. Dean nodded like a background actor. It's just been a lot. Then came the sentence I expected, but still felt like a punch. She was really hurt by the way you responded. They didn't mean to open the floor. They meant to open the script. She didn't know how else to reach you, Michelle added, her voice gentle, almost maternal. It wasn't about blame. I waited for someone, anyone, to ask me what happened. No one did. Instead, Dean jumped in. You probably didn't realize how that message came off. Saying you were on a date with her sister. I mean, come on. That smirk, half covered by a sip of coffee, made me want to throw the mug across the room. But I didn't move. My mother chimed in next. Madison has always tried to keep things peaceful, especially for the kids. She's really tried, sweetheart. And there it was. She's tried. You haven't. Madison still hadn't said a word, but her silence was louder than any defense I could have made. They recited her version like it was scripture. The context of her message skipped. My tone called unnecessary. Her urgency because of how deeply she still cared. I wasn't offered a chance to explain. I wasn't asked what I meant. I was told what it meant. I watched it all happen, from the cheap seat I'd unknowingly bought years ago. No one noticed how their words weren't even theirs. They'd memorized her grief, not mine. They defended her pain without ever acknowledging mine existed. So I nodded, sipped the coffee, smiled when Michelle patted my hand, and said almost nothing. Because I finally understood. I wasn't invited here to contribute. I was summoned to comply. And compliance used to be my mother tongue, but that version of me had left quietly, days ago. When the conversation ended, no one stood up right away. They lingered, waited for me to thank them, to hug someone, to say I understood. Instead, I stood slowly, walked toward the door, and turned just once. Thanks for the coffee. That's all I gave them. Outside, the air was cooler. The wind had picked up, but it felt good against my neck. I sat in my car a long time before driving off, watching the curtains shift in the front window. They thought my silence meant agreement, but I was already done playing my old role. They thought my silence meant agreement, but I was already done playing my old role. What none of them realized was, that night, something inside me didn't break. It just stopped pretending. When I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't go home right away. I drove around for a while, the kind of aimless looping you do when you need the engine to stay on just so the thoughts don't get too loud. A gas station, a darkened elementary school, some quiet suburban streets that hadn't changed in 20 years. But eventually, the stillness caught up with me, as it always does. At home, I walked into a silence that used to feel like freedom. Now it just felt like the other side of a slammed door. No missed calls, no texts. No one followed up after the family meeting. Not a single, "Hey, how are you holding up?" Just that eerie quiet that only happens when people assume you've submitted. I started noticing the small signs, group chats that had gone silent on my end. An invitation to dinner that didn't include me, sent to my sister and brother instead. The machine had reset like I was folded back into the role I'd stepped away from, with or without my permission. Monday came with a dullness I couldn't shake. I went through the motions at work, emails, coffee, nodding at the right times in meetings, but nothing stuck. It was like I was watching my own life from behind glass. By Wednesday, the messages started coming in. Not from the people in the room, but the ones just outside it. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in months sent, "I heard there was some tension Sunday. Hope you're okay. Maybe just clear the air. You know how families are." Then a friend of my brother messaged me late at night. "Honestly, man, not worth it. Just say sorry. Get it over with." Another one. "Be the bigger person." I sat with that one for a while. I'd heard that phrase my whole life. Be the bigger person. The one who doesn't raise his voice. The one who doesn't make things worse. The one who knows when to let it go. Except, I couldn't remember a single time anyone had said that to the person causing the damage. It was always said to the one standing in the fallout. I started keeping a list in my notes app just for myself. Every time someone told me to apologize, to keep the peace, I added it. Not to shame them, just to see it in black and white. 5 in one day, 11 by the weekend. Each one phrased like kindness. Each one a subtle demand to fold. Friday night, I got home late, tossed my keys on the kitchen table and sat down in the dark. The house was clean, laundry folded, bills paid. Everything was in order, except me. There was a draft message on my phone. I'd started it earlier that afternoon, during my lunch break. I hadn't deleted it. "Hey, Madison. Just wanted to say I'm sorry if my response hurt you. It wasn't meant to. I know things are complicated, and I don't want to add fuel to anything. Maybe we can talk sometime, on neutral ground." I read it again. It was polite, reasonable, safe. It was a message written by someone trying not to be hated, by someone who knew how to de-escalate, who'd been trained to do it, not by choice, but by repetition. I hovered over the send button and didn't press it. I couldn't, because deep down, I knew that message wasn't about resolution. It was about survival. It was about keeping a seat at a table where I wasn't even sure I wanted to sit anymore. And maybe, for the first time, I didn't need to. I set the phone down, let the silence sit there, full and honest. That was the moment I realized keeping the peace had cost me my voice. I sat in the same armchair where I'd stared at my phone 3 nights earlier, the same room where I nearly texted Madison to smooth things over. I hadn't sent that message. Instead, I let the silence stretch out. And for once, I didn't rush to fill it. That silence, uncomfortable as it was, had started to feel different. Not like surrender, more like space, stillness, but with structure. And then, Right when I thought things might be settling, I got the message. It came from someone I barely knew. Grace, a woman I'd only met a handful of times. She was my cousin Emily's roommate for 2 years in college. I hadn't seen her in over a decade, except maybe in tagged photos on Facebook. Her message was short, polite, no dramatic punctuation, no emojis. Hey, not sure if you already know. I debated whether to say anything, but I figured you should see this for yourself. Attached were 3 screenshots. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. There was a group chat, several names I recognized from our wider family circle. The tone was casual, but something about it made my stomach knot. Then I spotted my name. And hers. He snapped at her, called her dramatic, said he was done playing games and left without even hearing her side. I don't blame her. After everything she's been through, she deserves better. He made it about himself, as always. Guess being the quiet one doesn't mean he's innocent. I kept reading. More comments, more distortions. The version of me that lived in that thread wasn't just cold. It was calculated, petty, cruel. And none of it had come from Madison directly. But the tone, the phrases, they were familiar. The kicker came in Grace's follow-up text. Thought you'd want to know what's being passed around. Emily showed me, said the family already decided you acted out and made things worse. I stared at the phone for a long time, then set it down face down on the table. It wasn't rage that hit me. It was something colder, cleaner, clarity. I hadn't been overreacting. I hadn't misread the room. I hadn't let my imagination run wild. They had rewritten the story before I even had a chance to speak. They'd made sure the version of me they wanted, detached, immature, ungrateful, got there first. And I wasn't surprised. That's what hurt most. The proof didn't make me feel vindicated. It made me feel strangely calm, because now I understood why everything had moved so fast. Why I'd gotten that text out of nowhere. Why the urgent conversation had skipped me and landed directly in everyone else's inbox. It was never about resolution. It was about control. My response, "I'm on a date with your sister," wasn't just inconvenient. It was disruptive. It cut across a script that had already been written and shared. I walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and leaned against the counter in the quiet. It would have been easy, almost tempting, to send the screenshots to everyone, to forward them to my parents, to my siblings, to Madison herself. I could have added a snarky caption. I could have demanded an explanation, an apology, a reckoning. But I didn't. Instead, I started a folder on my computer, dragged the images into it, labeled it perspective. Then I opened a blank document and started writing dates, names, messages, not for drama, not for confrontation, just for record. I was done being the only one without the full story. If they wanted me to stay quiet, they'd need to work harder than this. That night, I slept better than I had all week, not because anything had been fixed, but because, for the first time, I wasn't confused, and with the confusion gone, so was the urge to appease. I didn't need to fix the lie. I just needed to stop feeding it. The next morning, I passed by my sister in the grocery store. She looked startled when she saw me, like she hadn't expected me to still be moving through the world like a normal person. She opened her mouth to say something, then stopped. I smiled. Not out of warmth. Just because I knew something she didn't. I didn't say a word. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what they'd say next. I was deciding when. I didn't have to say a word for them to feel it. Something had shifted. I could tell by the way the messages started coming in, one after the other, clipped and cautious. A week ago, they spoke to me like someone fragile. Now it was like I was a threat. "Hey, just checking in. Mom's been worried. She said she hasn't heard from you. You know this silence isn't helping anyone." No one asked me how I was doing. No one wondered out loud why I'd gone quiet. They just wanted things to return to manageable, not honest. The tone wasn't concern. It was strategy. By Thursday, even the emojis were gone. That was the real tell, honestly. My family never says what they mean, at least not directly. But their silence, their soft language, their need for everything to stay peaceful, those are the instruments they've always played. And suddenly, they were gone. I got a call at work. I didn't answer. Then a voicemail. "You don't want this to get messy, man," said the voice on the other end. I recognized it. My cousin Brandon. He always positioned himself as the neutral one, the bridge. But his words had a rehearsed edge this time. "I'm just saying, people talk. Let's not drag this through the dirt." Drag what? I hadn't said a thing, hadn't posted, hadn't replied, hadn't sent screenshots. But somehow they were preemptively defending themselves against a fight I hadn't picked. That's when I realized they were scared, not of what I'd done, but of what I might do next. They knew I had something. Someone must have told them. From that point on, the tension didn't come in waves. It pressed in steady, like a weight placed just between the shoulders. Constant, heavy, calculated. By Friday morning, there was a new version of me in circulation. This one was emotionally unstable. Still not over the divorce. Hasn't been the same since Dad passed. Maybe needs help, but won't ask. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere. Small comments dropped into conversations. Friends of friends asking odd questions. Even coworkers glancing at me differently. That's the trick, isn't it? You don't have to outright accuse someone to stain their name. Just hint enough times in the right circles, and you plant doubt like a seed. I felt it working. Part of me, tired, worn down, started to believe it. Maybe I was making too much of all this. Maybe I should have just gone to that urgent meeting and nodded my way through it like I used to. Maybe silence would have kept things cleaner. But then I'd remember the screenshots, the carefully crafted half-truths, the speed at which they all turned into one voice, one unified message I had no say in. And the part of me that used to beg for peace started to feel sick. I stayed off social media, stopped picking up calls unless I knew exactly who it was. I still went to work, kept my head down. I smiled when I needed to, laughed when it bought me quiet. But privately, I was documenting everything, every message, every name, every version of the story they tried to pin on me. Not to weaponize it, to own it, to remind myself I wasn't losing my mind, to remind myself I'd spent a lifetime making room for other people's feelings, only to find there was never space for my own. And when I felt weak, I read that last line I wrote in my notes. "They're counting on you to quit before the truth comes out." So I didn't. I didn't send rebuttals. I didn't call out names. I didn't make threats. I didn't fold. There's a strange kind of power in doing nothing when everything in you wants to fight. And even stranger, when people realize you're not reacting, they push harder. They mistake your silence for emptiness. But pressure only works when there's nothing solid underneath. And I had finally learned. I wasn't hollow. That Sunday, I got the call. It wasn't framed like an ambush, but I could smell the familiar scent of performance behind it. "We're getting everyone together," my older sister said, her voice honeyed and tight. Just to clear the air. Thought it might help. Help who? I wondered. But I agreed. Not because I believed in the outcome, but because I was ready. I hadn't said a word publicly since everything started unraveling. I hadn't corrected a single accusation or fought back, and it had driven them insane. Silence was supposed to mean surrender. This time I chose to speak, but on my terms. The living room was staged like it always was for family talks, couch in the center, everyone facing inward. No distractions, just that Midwestern politeness pressed over every chair like plastic covers on furniture. My mother offered coffee I didn't take. My brother leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the way he always did when pretending to care. My ex-wife sat beside my sister, her body turned just enough to say she didn't want to be here, but her eyes sharp with purpose. I took the chair closest to the edge. It wasn't about comfort. It was about positioning. They opened the floor, like they always did, with niceties and suggestions, veiled concerns, and soft scolding. "It's just gotten so messy," my sister started, voice low. "No one wants this to go on longer than it needs to," added my mother. Then my ex-wife, ever the actress, tilted her head and said, "We just want peace, for everyone." That's when I spoke. Calm, even. "I know," I said. "That's why I waited." They all blinked, like they didn't expect me to sound calm. They expected either silence or a breakdown, not stillness. "You waited for what?" my brother asked. "For the truth to stop being a moving target," I replied. The room stiffened. My ex shifted in her seat, crossed her arms. "If you're here to point fingers—" "I'm not," I interrupted. "I'm here to correct the record. That's all." That word, record, changed something. Her face twitched. Barely. But it did. My mother stepped in, the way she always did when tension built. "Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be." "That's exactly my point," I said. Then I pulled out the folder I'd brought, neatly stacked, no fanfare. I placed it on the coffee table, looked each of them in the eye. I brought timelines, text messages, timestamps, emails, even a few voice notes. Not opinions, just details. My ex scoffed. "Seriously? You're playing detective now?" I didn't answer. I opened the folder, picked one sheet, and slid it across the table. It showed the day she texted me urgently and the 5 calls she'd made to my sister that same morning, before I ever replied. Next page, screenshots of her messaging a mutual friend the night before, laying groundwork about needing to reel him back in. The next, calendar entries and time logs, showing she had already been meeting with my family, without me, long before the urgent text. Everything laid bare. I didn't accuse, I didn't explain, I just presented. Each page told a story. Quiet, factual, irrefutable. No one moved. My brother shifted once in his seat, opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it again. My sister looked down. My mother's hand froze on the armrest. And my ex? She said, "You're being vindictive," but it landed flat, like a match struck in rain. "No," I said, steady. "I'm just done being rewritten." The air changed. The power in the room didn't shift. It snapped. For years, they'd spoken for me, decided my intentions, curated my silence into their convenience. But now, I had spoken, not with volume, with fact, and they couldn't unsee it. No one apologized. No one confessed. That's not how this family works. But they didn't argue either. They sat, still. And me? I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I felt nothing. Because it wasn't about winning. It was about ending. I stood up, collected the folder. My mother finally said something. You know this. It'll just cause more division." I looked at her, tired, polite, protective of her image. "No," I replied. "It reveals the ones already there." And I walked out. No one followed. And for once, I didn't hope they would. That evening, I didn't do much. I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't pace or rehearse imaginary arguments in the mirror like I used to. I just sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water, watching the condensation slide down the side. It was quiet. Not empty. Just quiet. The days after passed like a muted film reel. No calls, no long-winded texts, no dramatic fallout. Just silence. A few family members stopped liking my posts online. Subtle, digital distancing. My brother unfollowed me. I noticed. Didn't react. Others never said anything again. Not even a, "How are you?" At first that stung. Then, strangely, it didn't. I kept going to work. I grocery shopped. I folded laundry and watered the plants by the window. Ordinary things had more weight now, like they meant something, not just filled time. I guess I thought truth would set off fireworks. I expected some moment of reckoning, maybe even regret from someone, but it didn't come, and eventually I understood. Consequences aren't always noisy. Sometimes they just settle in. People step back. Doors close, not with a slam, but with the quiet click of someone locking it from the other side. There was no grand apology, no "we were wrong." No acknowledgement that what had been done was dishonest, manipulative, damaging, but I stopped needing that. One night, a few weeks later, I was cleaning out my nightstand drawer, old receipts, dead pens, unmatched socks, and I found it. The watch, the one my father gave me years ago, after my first real job offer, the one engraved with "Keep the peace." I turned it over in my hand. The back still bore those words. I remember how proud I was when he gave it to me, like I was being welcomed into a long lineage of strong, silent men who handled things like a man should. Back then, I thought peace meant never rocking the boat, taking hits, laughing off disrespect, swallowing truth if it made the room uncomfortable. But now I understood what that watch had cost me. It wasn't just time. It was voice, presence, worth. I held it a little longer, then set it in the donate box. Someone else could wear it. Someone who still believed silence was strength. I had a different definition now. Peace, I realized, isn't something you protect at the expense of yourself. Peace is what happens when you stop letting other people write your story. The idea of family had changed, too. It wasn't tied to last names or shared holidays. It was clearer, smaller, but more honest. I still spoke to my niece sometimes. She checked in now and then, sent me memes, told me about school. We didn't talk about her mom. We didn't need to. Our conversations weren't built on what we avoided. They were built on what we actually said. Some people had faded from my life, but I didn't hate them. I just let them stay where they'd chosen to be, from a distance, without bitterness. One Sunday, as I sat on the back porch with a book, the late autumn light cutting long across the yard, I thought about everything that had happened, not with anger, not even sadness, just reflection. It had taken a long time to understand that not all lessons come with a bow tied around them. Some come in silence, in what doesn't happen, in who doesn't show up. And it's funny, I didn't win anything. There was no verdict, no dramatic reversal of reputation. I just stopped showing up for a version of peace that required me to disappear. That was enough. Before I end this, I want to ask you something. Who taught you that silence was love? Really think about that. Whose comfort did your silence protect? And who paid the price for it? I'm not telling you to fight. I'm not telling you to burn bridges or call out everyone who ever wronged you. But maybe, just maybe, it's worth asking. Is what you're calling peace actually peace? Or is it just the absence of your voice? I didn't win anything. I just stopped abandoning myself.